They called me the failure. Right there at Thanksgiving dinner, my own uncle standing up to toast everyone's success while deliberately skipping over me like I didn't exist. But when my lawyer walked through that dining room door an hour later with documents that would change everything, the same family who'd been laughing at my life suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. I'm Rachel Martinez, and this is the story of how being humiliated at Thanksgiving became the moment my family discovered who I really was. They called me the failure, right there at Thanksgiving dinner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My own uncle standing up to toast everyone's success while deliberately skipping over me like I didn't exist. But when my lawyer walked through that dining room door an hour later with documents that would change everything, the same family who'd been laughing at my life suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. I'm Rachel Martinez, and this is the story of how being humiliated at Thanksgiving became the moment my family discovered who I really was. My cousin Isabella was the family golden child, everything our traditional Mexican-American family valued in a daughter. Harvard Law School graduate, junior partner at a prestigious firm in downtown Los Angeles, married to a successful doctor living in a Beverly Hills mansion with their two perfect children. She arrived at every family gathering like she was gracing us with her presence. Designer handbag matched to designer shoes, speaking about cases that made headlines, and clients who paid her $500 an hour. Me? I was the family disappointment, the college dropout who'd walked away from my pre-med program at UCLA after 2 years, much to my parents' horror. While Isabella was climbing the legal ladder, I was bouncing between part-time jobs, barista, retail worker, freelance tutor, living in a studio apartment in East LA that my family whispered about like it was a personal failure rather than all I could afford. Thanksgiving at Abuela Rosa's house in Montebello was always Isabella's coronation. She'd sweep in with expensive wine and stories about courtroom victories, while our extended family hung on every word like she was delivering divine wisdom. My parents, Miguel and Carmen Martinez, would beam with pride as relatives asked Isabella for legal advice and complimented them on raising such a successful daughter. Isabella just won a $2 million settlement, Mom would announce to the table. The Los Angeles Times wrote an article about her case. Then I'd arrive in my old Honda Civic, wearing my best attempt at family dinner-appropriate clothing, usually something from Target that I'd owned for years, and the energy would shift to polite tolerance mixed with pity. Rachel's still exploring her options, Dad would explain carefully, like I was recovering from some prolonged illness. She's taking time to figure out her path. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't been wandering aimlessly for the past 5 years. I'd been building something in the shadows, something that required patience, research, and a kind of strategic thinking that had nothing to do with traditional success metrics. This particular Thanksgiving was different because Uncle Roberto, Dad's older brother and the family patriarch, had decided to make the contrast between Isabella and me the centerpiece of his annual gratitude speech. "Let's go around the table and celebrate everyone's achievements this year," he announced, wine glass raised. Isabella, of course, made partner at her firm and was featured in that magazine article about rising legal stars. The table erupted in applause. Isabella smiled graciously, accepting congratulations like she was receiving an award. "And my son Carlos just got promoted to regional manager," Uncle Roberto continued. "My daughter Sophia finished her nursing degree. Cousin Maria opened her second restaurant location." He went around the entire table, celebrating every accomplishment, every degree, every promotion, every traditional marker of success. When he got to me, he paused, looked directly at me with something that felt like disappointment, and said, "And Rachel? Well, Rachel is still finding herself." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every eye at the table measuring me, pitying me, dismissing me as the cautionary tale of wasted potential. "Actually," Uncle Roberto added with a laugh that cut like glass, "maybe we should call you the failure of the family. 27 years old, and still no real career, no husband, no house. What exactly have you been doing with your life?" The laughter that rippled around the table felt like being buried alive. But what they didn't know was that my phone had been buzzing all afternoon with messages I'd been ignoring. messages that would change everything. What my family didn't know was that for the past 4 years, I'd been quietly building something that had nothing to do with traditional career paths or conventional success. While they saw me as the college dropout working random jobs, I'd been developing skills and relationships that would revolutionize how I understood money, power, and opportunity. It started by accident during my last semester at UCLA when I was struggling to pay for textbooks and stumbled across something that would change my life forever: cryptocurrency mining. This was 2019, before Bitcoin became a household name, when most people still thought digital currency was either a scam or something only tech nerds understood. I'd been tutoring a computer science student named Kevin, who couldn't afford to pay me in cash. Instead, he offered to teach me about cryptocurrency mining using his spare computer equipment. I thought it was ridiculous. Invisible money created by computers? But I needed any source of income I could find. "Rachel, this isn't a get-rich-quick scheme," Kevin explained as he showed me how to set up mining rigs in my tiny dorm room. "This is the future of finance. But you have to think long-term, and you have to study the market like it's a science." What started as a desperate attempt to earn grocery money became an obsession. I spent every free hour learning about blockchain technology, studying market patterns, and understanding the emerging digital economy that most people dismissed as a fad. When I dropped out of pre-med, it wasn't because I was lost or lazy, it was because I discovered something more compelling than any traditional career path. While my family saw failure, I saw an opportunity to get in on the ground floor of a financial revolution. I moved to East LA not because I couldn't afford anywhere else, but because I needed cheap rent so I could invest every spare dollar into cryptocurrency and mining equipment. My studio apartment became a sophisticated operation: 6 mining rigs running 24/7, multiple computer monitors tracking markets across different time zones, and a level of financial analysis that would have impressed any Wall Street trader. The part-time jobs my family mocked were strategic choices. Barista work gave me flexible hours to monitor volatile crypto markets. Retail shifts taught me about consumer psychology and market timing. Freelance tutoring connected me with other young investors who shared information about emerging opportunities. But the real breakthrough came 2 years ago when I started identifying patterns in how institutional investors were moving money into cryptocurrency. I developed a trading strategy that combined technical analysis with social media sentiment tracking, allowing me to predict market movements with remarkable accuracy. While Isabella was billing $500 an hour for legal work, I was making thousands of dollars in minutes by reading market signals that established investors couldn't see. While my family celebrated her $150,000 salary, I was quietly building something that generated more income in a good month than most people made in a year. The most successful investment came 18 months ago, when I recognized that a relatively unknown cryptocurrency called Solana was about to break out. I invested $50,000, every penny I'd saved from 4 years of failure, when it was trading at $12 per coin. By October 2024, Solana had reached $180 per share. My $50,000 investment had grown to over $750,000, but that was just the beginning. I'd been diversifying into NFTs, DeFi protocols, and early-stage blockchain companies. I'd become an angel investor in 3 cryptocurrency startups, 2 of which had already been acquired by major tech companies. The messages buzzing on my phone during Thanksgiving dinner weren't from friends wondering why I was missing some social event. They were from my investment attorney, my tax advisor, and the founders of a blockchain company that had just received an acquisition offer that would make my investment worth more than Isabella would earn in a decade. But my family knew none of this. To them, I was still the failure who couldn't figure out her life. The humiliation at Thanksgiving dinner reached its peak when Uncle Roberto decided that calling me the failure wasn't enough. He wanted to make sure everyone understood exactly how disappointed the family was in my life choices. "You know what really bothers me about Rachel?" he said, his voice getting louder as the wine kicked in. "It's not just that she dropped out of medical school. It's that she seems proud of being a failure." The entire table was staring at me now. Cousins, aunts, uncles, even Abuela Rosa looked uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. "Roberto, Maybe we should change the subject, Mom said quietly, but he was just getting started. No, Carmen, someone needs to say this. Rachel is 27 years old. No career, no husband, no children, no house. She works at a coffee shop and lives in a studio apartment like she's still in college. What kind of example is that setting for the younger cousins? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Isabella looked mortified, but she didn't defend me. Dad stared at his plate. The whole family sat in uncomfortable silence, while Uncle Roberto dismantled my life piece by piece. And the worst part, he continued, is that she acts like she's making some kind of artistic statement by refusing to grow up. Rachel, you had every opportunity. Your parents sacrificed to send you to UCLA. You threw it all away for what? To serve coffee and live in poverty? I should have walked out. I should have defended myself. Instead, I sat there absorbing every word like I deserved it, because part of me wondered if they were right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe my cryptocurrency investments were just elaborate gambling. Maybe I was the family failure who'd convinced herself she was smart while everyone else could see the truth. You want to know what's really sad? Uncle Roberto said, turning to address the entire table. Isabella works 60-hour weeks, handles million-dollar cases, and contributes to society. Rachel plays on her computer all day and calls it work. That's when Isabella finally spoke up, but not to defend me. Uncle Roberto, I'm sure Rachel is doing her best, she said with the kind of patronizing kindness that hurt worse than his direct attacks. Not everyone is cut out for professional success. Some people just need more time to find their place. More time to find my place. Like I was some lost child who hadn't figured out how to be an adult. The thing is, Isabella continued, success requires discipline, education, and long-term thinking. You can't just drift through life hoping something will work out. I felt something break inside me. Not just embarrassment or hurt, but something deeper. The realization that no matter what I achieved, my family would always see me as the cautionary tale, the one who'd wasted her potential and needed their pity. Uncle Roberto raised his wine glass one more time. Here's to the successful members of our family. May Rachel someday join them. Everyone drank except me. I sat there in my Target dress, surrounded by people who shared my blood, but had never bothered to know who I really was. Wah, that's when my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't just a text. It was a call from David Chen, my investment attorney. I'd been ignoring his messages all day, but something about the persistence made me check my phone under the table. 7 missed calls, 12 text messages, all marked urgent. The last message made my heart stop. Rachel, I need to speak with you immediately. The Ethereum blockchain acquisition went through. You need to understand what this means for your portfolio. I'm driving over now. I looked up at my family, still celebrating their conventional successes, still dismissing me as the failure. They had no idea what was about to walk through that door. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed air after Uncle Roberto's public dissection of my life failures. But really, I needed to call David Chen back before my family moved on to dessert and more stories about everyone else's achievements. Standing in Abuela's backyard, surrounded by the lemon trees she'd planted 30 years ago, I dialed David's number with shaking hands. Rachel, thank God. His voice was electric with excitement. Where are you? We need to talk immediately. I'm at family Thanksgiving dinner, David. What's so urgent that you're calling me on a holiday? Because BlockTech Solutions just got acquired by Microsoft for $2.8 billion, and you own a 3% stake in the company. The words hit me like cold water. BlockTech Solutions was one of the 3 blockchain startups I'd invested in 18 months ago. One of those risky investments my family would have criticized if they'd known about it. David, slow down. What does that mean exactly? Rachel, it means your $100,000 investment in BlockTech is now worth $84 million. I sat down hard on Abuela's concrete steps, the sound of my family's laughter floating through the kitchen window. $84 million. More money than everyone inside that house would earn in their combined lifetimes. But that's not all, David continued. The acquisition triggers a clause in your other startup investments. CryptoSecure and DeFi Innovations both have acquisition offers on the table now. Conservative estimate? Your total portfolio is worth somewhere between $120 and $150 million. I stared at the kitchen window, where I could see Uncle Roberto gesturing animatedly, probably still explaining to everyone why I was the family disappointment. David, are you sure about this? Rachel, I've been your attorney for 2 years. I've watched you make investment decisions that Harvard MBAs wouldn't understand. You didn't just get lucky. You identified technology trends before institutional investors even knew they existed. Through the window, I watched Isabella showing everyone something on her phone, probably another news article about one of her legal cases. There's something else, David said. Microsoft wants to meet with you directly. They're interested in your investment strategy, specifically how you identified BlockTech's potential before their own venture capital division. They want to meet with me? Rachel, you're about to become one of the youngest self-made millionaires in cryptocurrency investment history. Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, and 3 other major financial institutions want to discuss potential consulting contracts. I looked through that kitchen window at my family, celebrating conventional success while completely unaware that the person they'd just labeled the failure had built a fortune that dwarfed all their achievements combined. David, I need you to do something for me. What's that? I need you to come to my grandmother's house in Montebello, tonight, right now. Rachel, it's Thanksgiving. Can't this wait until tomorrow? No, it can't wait. I need you to bring the acquisition documents, the portfolio statements, and anything else that proves what we're talking about. Why? I watched Uncle Roberto stand up again, probably preparing another toast, another opportunity to remind everyone about their successful children and their disappointing niece. Because my family just spent the evening explaining to me why I'm a failure, and I think it's time they learned what failure actually looks like. David was quiet for a moment. Rachel, are you sure about this? Family dynamics can be complicated, and money changes things. David, they called me the failure, in front of the entire extended family. They treated me like a cautionary tale about wasted potential. I think they deserve to know the truth. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Thank you, David. And David? Bring business cards. Something tells me this is going to be an interesting evening. I hung up and walked back toward the house, where my family was still celebrating everyone's success except mine. They had no idea what was about to change. Walking back into that dining room was like entering a crime scene where I was both the victim and the only witness who knew what had really happened. My family was deep into dessert and coffee, the conversation flowing easily now that they'd disposed of the uncomfortable topic of my failures. But as I sat back down, something David had said on the phone kept echoing in my mind. You identified technology trends before institutional investors even knew they existed. I started really listening to the conversations around me, and what I heard made my stomach turn. Isabella was holding court again, this time talking about her latest case involving cryptocurrency fraud. These people think they can just throw money at digital coins and become millionaires, she said with the confident dismissal of someone who'd never bothered to understand what she was criticizing. I just won a $5 million settlement against a cryptocurrency startup that was basically running a Ponzi scheme. Uncle Roberto nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. These get-rich-quick schemes prey on people who don't understand real investing. The problem, Isabella continued, is that people like Rachel fall for this stuff. They think cryptocurrency is some revolutionary technology, but it's just gambling with extra steps. I felt heat rising in my chest. She was talking about my life's work like it was a casino addiction. Dad joined the conversation. Remember when Rachel kept talking about blockchain technology a few years ago? We were worried she was getting involved in some kind of scam. I tried to warn her, Mom added. I told her if these investments were real, wouldn't smart people like Isabella be doing them? The entire table laughed. They were literally mocking the expertise that had just made me worth more than all of them combined. But it got worse. Cousin Carlos, Uncle Roberto's son, who'd just been celebrated for his promotion to regional manager, started talking about his investment portfolio. I stick to real investments, he said proudly. Index funds, blue-chip stocks, real estate. My financial advisor says cryptocurrency is for suckers who don't understand the fundamentals of wealth building. That's smart, Isabella agreed. Real wealth comes from education, hard work, and proven strategies, not from gambling on internet money. I watched these people, my blood relatives, dismiss an entire industry that was revolutionizing global finance, while celebrating their conventional achievements as if they were profound innovations. Uncle Roberto leaned back in his chair, satisfied with his family's wisdom. This is why education matters. Isabella understands law, Carlos understands business, Sophia understands healthcare. They have real skills that create real value. Unlike some people, he added, glancing at me, who think they can skip the hard work and get rich from computer games. That's when the full horror of the situation hit me. It wasn't just that my family had underestimated me. It wasn't just that they'd dismissed my potential or failed to see my achievements. They had actively, confidently, publicly declared that the industry where I'd built my fortune was a scam. They had positioned themselves as the smart, educated family members who were too sophisticated to fall for cryptocurrency nonsense. In 90 minutes, David Chen was going to walk through that door, with documents proving that their failure niece had built a $150 million fortune in the exact field they'd been mocking all evening. They hadn't just called me the failure. They'd staked their entire understanding of intelligence, success, and financial wisdom on the belief that I was wrong about everything. And they were about to discover just how wrong they were about being right. Pios. I smiled and asked Abuela if she had any more coffee. This was going to be a very long evening. Pios. As the evening wore on, the weight of what was about to happen pressed down on me like a physical force. I sat at that table, watching my family celebrate their conventional successes, while casually demolishing everything I'd built my life around, and I faced the most important decision I'd ever make. David would be here soon with documents that would prove I was worth more money than anyone at this table could imagine. But revealing that truth would detonate every relationship I'd ever known. Part of me wanted to call David and tell him not to come. I could quietly excuse myself, go home to my studio apartment, and continue being the family failure while privately enjoying a fortune they'd never know about. It would be easier, safer, less complicated. But then Uncle Roberto stood up again. You know what, everyone? I think we should have a serious conversation about Rachel. My heart stopped. Isabella looked uncomfortable. Dad shifted in his chair. Mom whispered, Roberto, please. Under her breath. No, I'm serious, he continued, the wine making him bolder. We've all been dancing around this for years. Rachel is almost 30 years old, and she's completely lost. Maybe it's time for some tough love. He turned to address me directly. Rachel, honey, you're living in a fantasy. This cryptocurrency nonsense, this idea that you can get rich without real work, this refusal to accept that you need to grow up and get a real job, it's not cute anymore. It's concerning. The table fell silent. Even the children had stopped talking, sensing the tension in the room. Your parents are worried sick about you, Uncle Roberto continued. Isabella offered to help you get an entry-level position at her law firm. Carlos said his company is hiring administrative assistants. We're all trying to help you, but you have to want to be helped. Roberto, Abuela Rosa said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of matriarch. Maybe that's enough. No, Mama, someone needs to say this. Rachel is an adult, and adults face reality. The reality is that you can't support yourself on coffee shop wages forever. The reality is that no one gets rich from internet money. The reality is that every day you spend chasing these fantasies is another day you're not building a real future. I looked around the table at faces that ranged from uncomfortable to sympathetic to smugly satisfied. These people who shared my DNA but had never bothered to learn who I really was. What would it take? I asked quietly. What take? Uncle Roberto responded. What would it take for you to believe that I'm not a failure? What would you need to see to admit that maybe you don't know everything about my life? Isabella leaned forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in. Rachel, this isn't about proof. This is about making better choices. But if there was proof, I pressed. If there was evidence that everything you think you know about my life is wrong, would you be willing to admit it? Uncle Roberto laughed. Rachel, what kind of proof could you possibly have? Bank statements from your cryptocurrency gambling? Screenshots of imaginary profits? Something like that, I said quietly. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Pulling into the driveway now. Documents are ready. Are you sure about this? I looked around the table one more time. At Uncle Roberto, who'd built his identity around being the successful patriarch who could judge everyone else's choices. At Isabella, who'd spent her career being celebrated as the smart one, the accomplished one, the one who understood how the world really worked. At my parents, who'd spent years apologizing for their disappointing daughter, I typed back, "Come to the front door in 5 minutes. Ring the bell." Then I set my phone down and smiled at my family. Actually, Uncle Roberto, I think you're about to get exactly the kind of proof you're asking for. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:47 p.m., cutting through the family conversation like a blade. Everyone turned toward the sound, confused about who would be visiting during Thanksgiving dinner. "I'll get it," I said, standing up with a calmness I didn't feel. "Rachel, who could that be?" Mom asked, concern creeping into her voice. "My lawyer," I said simply, and walked toward the front door. The silence behind me was deafening. I heard chairs scraping as people turned to look at each other, confused whispers about why I would need a lawyer, nervous laughter about the absurdity of the situation. David Chen stood on Abuela's front porch in an expensive suit, holding a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked like exactly what he was, a high-powered attorney who'd driven across Los Angeles on a holiday to deliver life-changing news. "Rachel," he said quietly, "are you absolutely sure about this?" Through the window I could see my family straining to get a look at him, their faces reflecting confusion and growing concern. "They called me the failure, David. They spent the entire evening explaining why I'm a disappointment to the family. I think they deserve to know the truth." I led David into the dining room, where 15 pairs of eyes followed our every movement. He looked completely professional and utterly serious, like someone who dealt with matters of extreme importance. "Everyone," I said, my voice steady, "this is David Chen, my investment attorney." Uncle Roberto recovered first. "Rachel, what's this about? Why do you need a lawyer?" David set his briefcase on the table, right next to the remnants of Thanksgiving dinner. "I'm here to discuss some recent developments in Ms. Martinez's investment portfolio." "Investment portfolio?" Isabella's voice carried professional skepticism. "What kind of investments?" "Primarily cryptocurrency and blockchain technology startups," David replied, opening his briefcase and removing several official-looking documents. The table erupted in nervous laughter. Uncle Roberto actually slapped the table. "Oh, this is rich!" "Rachel, did you seriously hire a lawyer to talk about your cryptocurrency gambling?" "Sir," David said, his voice taking on the formal tone he probably used in corporate boardrooms, "I'm not here to discuss gambling. I'm here to discuss the fact that as of 4 p.m. today, Ms. Martinez's investment portfolio is valued at approximately $147 million. The laughter died instantly. "I'm sorry, what?" Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. David spread 3 documents across the table. BlockTech Solutions, one of Ms. Martinez's portfolio companies, was acquired by Microsoft Corporation today for $2.8 billion. Ms. Martinez owned a 3% stake, making her personal return $84 million. The silence was so complete I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. Additionally, David continued, 2 other companies in her portfolio have received acquisition offers triggered by the Microsoft deal. Conservative estimates put the total portfolio value between $140 and $150 million. Uncle Roberto's face had gone completely white. That's not possible." "It's not only possible, sir, it's documented." David pulled out official letterhead from Microsoft Corporation. "Ms. Martinez has been personally invited to a meeting next week with Microsoft's venture capital division to discuss potential consulting opportunities." Dad's voice was barely audible. "Rachel, is this real?" I looked around the table at faces frozen in shock, at the family who'd spent 4 years dismissing my life as a series of failures. "Remember when you said intelligent people like Isabella would be investing in cryptocurrency if it was legitimate?" I asked quietly. "Well, it turns out intelligence isn't about having the right degree. It's about recognizing opportunity before everyone else does. Isabella stared at the Microsoft letterhead, like it might disappear if she blinked. The internet money you've been mocking all evening just made your family failure worth more than all of you combined will earn in your lifetimes. The room remained frozen in stunned silence as the magnitude of what they'd just learned settled over them like a heavy blanket. The aftermath of David's revelation was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Each family member processed the information differently, and what followed was more devastating than I'd anticipated. Uncle Roberto was the first to speak, his voice hollow and confused. "Rachel, if this is true, why didn't you tell us?" "Tell you what, Uncle Roberto? That I was investing in cryptocurrency? You spent the entire evening explaining why cryptocurrency is a scam for stupid people. You said I was living in a fantasy." Isabella stood up abruptly, her face flushed with something between embarrassment and anger. "This doesn't make sense. Rachel, I've handled cryptocurrency fraud cases. I know this industry. These numbers, they're not realistic." David pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot of the Microsoft acquisition announcement from the Wall Street Journal. "Ms. Martinez, with respect, your legal practice focuses on fraud cases. Ms. Rachel Martinez focused on identifying legitimate opportunities before institutional investors recognized their value." The comparison hit Isabella like a physical blow. She sat back down, staring at documents that proved her dropout cousin had achieved something she couldn't even comprehend. Dad's reaction was the most painful to watch. "Rachel, sweetheart, we were worried you were throwing your life away. Why didn't you tell us you were doing so well?" "Because every time I tried to explain what I was working on, you told me to get a real job. When I mentioned blockchain technology, you and Mom agreed it sounded like a scam. When I said I was making investments, you suggested I talk to Carlos about his entry-level position at the bank." Mom started crying quietly. "We just wanted what was best for you." "No, Mom. You wanted what looked best to other people. You wanted me to have the kind of success you could brag about at church. You never cared whether I was actually successful." Cousin Carlos, who'd been celebrated earlier for his regional manager promotion, looked like he'd been slapped. "Rachel, my salary is $80,000 a year. I thought I was doing well." "You are doing well, Carlos. But you also spent this evening explaining why your financial advisor says cryptocurrency is for suckers. Your financial advisor makes a commission on traditional investments. I made $84 million because I understood something he didn't." The room fell silent again. David cleared his throat diplomatically. "If I may," he said. "Ms. Martinez has also been approached by Goldman Sachs about a consulting position in their emerging technologies division. The starting salary would be $2.5 million annually." Uncle Roberto put his head in his hands. "Rachel, I don't understand. How did you know? How did you figure this out when none of us did?" "Because you weren't paying attention. You were so busy celebrating conventional success that you missed the biggest financial revolution in 50 years happening right in front of you." Isabella finally spoke, her lawyer's training helping her process the situation. "Rachel, assuming this is all legitimate, what happens now?" "What happens now is that I have a decision to make. Microsoft wants to meet with me next week. Goldman Sachs wants to hire me. 3 other major financial institutions want to discuss investment consulting contracts." I looked around the table at faces that had shifted from confusion to shock to something approaching fear. "But first, I have to decide whether I want anything to do with a family that spent 4 years treating me like a cautionary tale." "Rachel," Abuela Rosa spoke for the first time since David's arrival, her voice carrying the weight of 8 decades. "You're angry. You have a right to be angry. But family is family." "Is it, Abuela? Because tonight Uncle Roberto called me the failure, in front of everyone. Isabella offered me an entry-level job at her law firm out of pity. Dad apologized to people for my life choices. Mom told relatives I was still figuring things out." I stood up, David gathering his documents. "You didn't just fail to support me. You actively undermined my confidence in decisions that turned out to be the smartest choices I've ever made. You made me question my own judgment about investments that just made me worth more money than you can imagine." The silence stretched uncomfortably. "The person you called the failure tonight owns a portfolio worth more than this entire neighborhood. The dropout you've been worried about just became one of the youngest self-made millionaires in cryptocurrency history. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Maybe it's time you figured out the difference between looking successful and actually being successful. David and I left them sitting in that dining room, surrounded by the ruins of everything they thought they knew about success, failure, and family. The transformation didn't happen overnight. For 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, my phone stayed silent. No calls from family, no apologies, no attempts to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I began to think that revealing the truth had cost me my relationships permanently. Then everything changed when the Wall Street Journal published a profile piece titled, "The Millennial Who Saw Microsoft Coming: How a 27-year-old college dropout Beat Wall Street at Its Own Game." The article featured a photo of me in the Microsoft boardroom, described my investment strategy in detail, and included quotes from executives who called my market analysis remarkably sophisticated and ahead of institutional thinking by at least 2 years. Within hours, my phone exploded with messages from family members who'd suddenly discovered that their local newspaper, their friends, and their coworkers were talking about Rachel Martinez, the cryptocurrency genius from East LA. The first call came from Isabella. "Rachel, I saw the article. I need to apologize. I spent years thinking I was the smart one in the family, and I completely missed what you were building." Her voice sounded different. Smaller, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "I've been doing research since Thanksgiving," she continued. "I've been reading about blockchain technology, studying your investment thesis, trying to understand how you saw opportunities that I dismissed as scams." "And what did you find?" I asked. "I found out that you're brilliant. Not just lucky, brilliant. Your analysis of market trends, your understanding of emerging technology, your ability to identify value before anyone else. Rachel, I have a Harvard Law degree, and I couldn't have done what you did." The admission must have cost her everything. Isabella had built her identity around being the family's intellectual success story. Dad's call came next, and he was crying before he even said hello. "Misha, I read the article. I saw what those Microsoft executives said about you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you were failing when you were succeeding beyond anything I could have imagined." "Dad." "No, let me finish. I spent so many years worrying about what other people thought of our family. I wanted you to have the kind of success that looked impressive to my friends. I never asked whether you were actually happy or actually achieving things that mattered." The Microsoft meeting had gone better than I'd dreamed. They'd offered me a position as senior advisor for emerging technologies, with a salary that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But more importantly, they'd treated me like an expert, not like someone who'd gotten lucky. 3 days after the Wall Street Journal article, Uncle Roberto showed up at my apartment. He looked older, deflated, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy weight. "Rachel, I came to apologize, not just for Thanksgiving, but for years of not seeing who you really were." He sat down heavily on my couch, looking around at the space he'd once dismissed as evidence of my failure. "I spent 40 years building a traditional business, working conventional hours, following conventional wisdom. I thought that was what success looked like. Then I read that article, and I realized, you didn't just make money, you changed an entire industry's understanding of value. Uncle Roberto, I called you the failure, Rachel. I stood up in front of our entire family and used those words. But the truth is, I was terrified that you represented something I didn't understand. You were taking risks I would never take, making decisions I couldn't even comprehend." He pulled out a newspaper clipping. "Forbes wants to interview you. Goldman Sachs is featuring your investment strategy in their quarterly report. 3 universities want you to speak at their business schools." "I know," I said quietly. "Do you also know that your success has made me rethink everything I thought I knew about intelligence, about risk, about what it means to build something valuable?" The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. We talked about failure and success, about traditional paths and innovative thinking, about family and forgiveness. By the end, Uncle Roberto wasn't just apologizing, he was asking for advice. His own business was struggling, and he wanted to understand how I'd learned to see opportunities that others missed. "Rachel," he said as he prepared to leave, "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because you're rich, but because you were smart enough to trust your own judgment when everyone else was telling you to follow theirs." For the first time in years, I felt like I had a family that actually knew who I was. 2 years later, I stand in the conference room of Martinez Capital Management, the investment firm I founded with a portion of my cryptocurrency fortune. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our downtown LA office, I can see the city sprawling toward the Pacific, full of dreamers and innovators who remind me of who I used to be. But the moment that truly defined this transformation happened 6 months ago, during our second annual family Thanksgiving dinner, this one hosted at my new house in Manhattan Beach. The same relatives who'd once dismissed me as the failure sat around a table in my dining room. But the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Instead of celebrating conventional achievements, they were asking me about emerging technology trends, market opportunities, and investment strategies. Uncle Roberto, who'd spent years mocking my cryptocurrency gambling, had invested his retirement savings in a tech startup I'd recommended. Carlos had left his regional manager position to launch a fintech company with seed funding from my venture capital fund. Even Isabella had transitioned from traditional law practice to become general counsel for a blockchain company. "Rachel," Uncle Roberto said during his traditional Thanksgiving toast, "2 years ago, I called you the failure because I thought success meant following proven paths. But you taught our family that real intelligence means seeing opportunities before they become obvious." The acknowledgement felt surreal. This was the same man who'd publicly humiliated me for refusing to accept conventional definitions of achievement. But the most meaningful change was with my parents. Dad now introduces me to his friends as my daughter, the venture capitalist, with a pride that feels genuine rather than desperate. Mom has become one of my most effective advocates, sharing articles about my business success with a joy that seems rooted in understanding rather than just appearance. "I spent so many years worrying about what success looked like to other people," she told me recently. "I never asked what success felt like to you." The business itself has exceeded every expectation. Martinez Capital Management now manages $500 million in assets, specializing in emerging technology investments. We've funded 43 startups, with 12 successful exits and 3 companies that have achieved billion-dollar valuations. But what I'm most proud of isn't the financial returns. It's the entrepreneurs we've supported who remind me of my younger self. Young people with unconventional ideas, innovative approaches, and the courage to pursue opportunities that established investors don't understand. Last month, I gave a keynote speech at UCLA's business school, the same university where I'd been a pre-med dropout just 5 years earlier. Standing behind that podium, looking out at an auditorium full of students who were probably struggling with their own family expectations and conventional definitions of success, I told them something I wished someone had told me. Intelligence isn't about having the right degree or following the safest path. Intelligence is about trusting your analysis even when everyone around you thinks you're wrong. It's about recognizing opportunity in spaces where others see only risk. The most rewarding part of my new life isn't the money or the recognition. It's the relationships that have been rebuilt on authentic understanding rather than shallow expectations. Isabella and I now collaborate regularly, with her legal expertise complementing my investment strategy. We've become genuine partners instead of competitive cousins. David Chen, the lawyer who walked into that Thanksgiving dinner with documents that changed everything, has become both my business partner and my closest advisor. "Rachel," he told me recently, "what happened that night wasn't just about proving your family wrong. It was about proving to yourself that your judgment was worth trusting." He was right. For years, I'd allowed my family's dismissal to make me question my own instincts. That Thanksgiving dinner was the moment I finally stopped seeking their validation and started trusting my own expertise. The studio apartment in East LA, where I'd built my cryptocurrency fortune, is now a reminder of how far I've traveled, but also of the person who had the courage to pursue opportunities that no one else understood. My name is Rachel Martinez. 2 years ago, my family called me the failure at Thanksgiving dinner. Today, they call me for investment advice. Sometimes the people who see your potential last are the ones who've known you longest. And sometimes being called a failure is just the motivation you need to redefine what success actually means. But mostly, I learned that the most powerful moment in any relationship is when someone finally sees you for who you really are, instead of who they thought you should be. Welcome to the table where failure becomes wisdom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.